Hello and welcome to Energy Unplugged by Aurora. This podcast features various experts from Aurora having in-depth conversations with key industry leaders, policymakers and academics from all over the world. It explores the hottest topics across the energy market and gives a unique perspective on major energy issues.
Welcome to Energy Unplugged. I'm John Feddersen, founder and chief executive of Aurora. And my guest on the show today is a pioneer of the renewable power sector in Brazil, having been, among other roles, a founder of Brazil's Solar Energy Association, Absolar. And he's currently the general manager of one of Brazil's largest renewables developers, Atlas Renewable Energy. My guest on the show today is Luis Pita. Welcome, Luis.
Hey, John. Welcome, everybody. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today with you guys.
Great. And yeah, thanks for making the time to dial in from Sao Paulo too. So I'd like to start with your career, which is a very interesting one. But first of all, just to understand from you, what exactly is it that Atlas does broadly, globally, and then within Brazil?
Okay. So we deliver intelligence energy solutions for our customers while we intend to transform the shape of the markets in which we work, trying to make a better world for the persons through the intelligent use of energy. Our main focus are industrial customers in all those markets in which we work, and we develop tailor-made solutions for them. So we can count on our portfolio of customers among several AAA companies that share with us the vision of a better world, share with us the vision of integrate with the communities and make better living for the people in which they and us work.
Excellent. Thank you. That's great. That's really helpful context. And we might come back to that relationship between, AAA, high credit rating consumers who want to green their activities and the build out of renewables in Brazil. But I'll park that for the time being, because the other thing I wanted to ask about regarding your career is the Brazilian Solar Energy Association. We haven't had a large number of the sort of trade body lobby group type organizations on the podcast. But can you say in your mind, what's the most important role for a trade body in the electricity sector?
Okay, so it has been an honor and a great opportunity for me and other people to found AB Solar, the Brazilian Association of Photovoltaic Energy, back 10 years ago. So we're making this year our 10th anniversary. AB Solar is the authorized voice of the sector in front of regulatory bodies, government, relevant stakeholders, and we share this mandate and this view with 700 associates. So it has grown dramatically since the beginning of our activity. We were only 9 companies. As I said, today more than 700. It's one of the, I would say, biggest association in the energy sector. And our mission is to disseminate the benefits of energy, imbue the people that doesn't have that understanding of our business, and make staying ambience of doing business with the Brazilian community.
Yeah. And what did you just to digress on that one briefly, Luis? What made you think the time was right? You said there were 9 initial members. Was there something you saw 10 years ago in Brazil in the solar industry where you said, okay, we actually need to coordinate better and communicate better?
Yeah, at that time, there was no regulation for centralized energy. So there was a very infant regulation regarding GD, which at that time was mainly you put a panel in your roof and you deliver energy, you consume it, or you pump it into the system and you get a balance at the end of the month of the energy you inject while the energy you consume. That was all. And we understood that we need a voice to talk to the different bodies to let them understand that solar was a reality in other countries, B, that Brazil was a privileged atmosphere for this kind of energy, and C, help them with other examples on how to regulate this market, how to open it through auctions at that time, and how to create an industry that didn't exist at that time. So since December 2023, in which we founded the AB Solar, to October 2024, in which the first auction took place, there was a very exciting period in which we made the government aware of PV. That was a good option. B, helping to organize the auction. C, to create an ambience in the development bank to finance those projects. So from that onwards, in which I think was kind of a gigawatt that was the auction, to today, in which we have more than 30 gigawatts in the market, I think has been a tremendous journey.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I see this all around the world that new technologies come along, and there are rules in the power market that just aren't they didn't even really contemplate these new things. Whether it's distributed, this idea that you would generate a lot of electricity on the low voltage network, or with batteries. I remember in a bunch of markets we've seen, the sort of market arrangements hadn't really dealt with something that was both a demand and supply of electricity like a battery is. And so you see this quite big role for, basically changing the rules of the game to reflect the emerging technology. So I'm not surprised to see that as a prominent responsibility there. Can I ask you, sort of zooming back, you're still on the board, you're heavily involved, and more of a kind of philosophical question. When do you think trade bodies are at their best, and when do you think what are they doing when they're at their worst as well?
I think it's a constant interaction, John, with the different bodies, the regulatory bodies. So, and there is a lot of hiccups in the journey, because we are competing with other sources of energy, which also have their valid arguments. B, there have been in these 10 years several administrations with different views regarding environmental, regarding the penetration of renewables, regarding the use of traditional sources. So we always have to navigate with the different bodies, with the different administrations, and try to make our voice heard, make them aware of the benefits that it has for the society. So there are many, not only directly related bodies with the energy sector, but at the end of the day, we deliver clean energy, sustainable energy for, in our case, 4 out of 10 of the electro-intensive consumer in Brazil, which means that we deliver products which are cheaper, which are greener than they did some time ago. They have a big compromise. And our role there is to help them to accomplish their sustainable compromise. So at the end of the day, there is a repercussion of what we do, which is much higher than and bigger and more extensive than just the relationship with the Ministry of Energy or the regulatory. We need to talk also with agriculture. We need to talk also with industry. We need to talk also to end consumer that want a green product from their suppliers. So there's a lot of interactions and incredibly sane dialogue with all these stakeholders.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we had we had Emma Pinchbeck, who runs the Energy UK, which is the British trade body, and I definitely don't envy people in that position, because, as you say, energy is so fundamental to all of society, that if it's not working well, there's always going to be someone who's upset about something. And so the stakeholder management in energy seems to be a level up on almost any other sector. Maybe the financial sector is another one that touches on the whole economy and everyone has an opinion on. Okay,
indeed,
good.
And in Brazil, you have a very good observation. Different from other markets, Brazil has very strong development banks, and the activity of the commercial banking investment in projects like we do is practically limited to warranty, the main financing. So also the work to involve the development banks that at the end of the day are the ones that are going to finance our projects. It's a incredible task, because it's public bodies which have to publish their requirements, which includes sometimes a national product, national items to increase the competitiveness of the Brazilian industry. So this is an additional concern and additional opportunity that we have here to bring to our side the BNDES, the biggest development bank in Latin America, BNB, one of the regional banks that act here very actively, and make them understand the benefits that they have for the country and for the population.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Good. Yes, and it's I suppose one of the things you also mentioned there that I hope we will touch on later is the ebb and flow of policy as governments change. And of course, Lula, head of state for Brazil, has recently announced a major energy policy, and it will be good to get your views on that shortly. But before we get to that, I'd like to touch on a few other sector-specific issues. So first of all, when people in international markets think about Brazil, they tend to think about the dominance of hydroelectricity. I think it's definitely more than 50% of the terawatt hours come from hydro. There's a lot of water in Brazil, and there's been a lot of development. And right now, I was in Sao Paulo maybe 3 months ago. I'm back in a couple of months. There was quite a bit of pessimism because there's an El Nino type effect at the moment, and there's an enormous amount of electricity being produced, and prices are low. So as someone, and it's slightly unusual in the sense that investors in other markets tend to think in terms of single years, right? They think, there's a winter season, there's a summer season. I think about making money at different times. With Brazil, it seems like these timelines stretch out to 3 or 4 years as sort of the period. So sort of simple question here is sort of, when is the best? Sorry, just one other piece of context. I talk to renewables developers in Brazil, and they say, "Oh, the market's terrible, oversupplied, prices very low. Don't make investments now." But it seems to me that these are 20, 30-year assets that this weather cycle is much shorter than that. So when is the best time to invest in renewable or power generation in Brazil in general?
Okay, so I think there's a lot of questions in your question.
I tried to make it one, but feel free to answer any of the ones you saw there.
First one, if you want a short-term return, don't come to Brazil. Okay, this is a complicated country with cycles. Okay, and they have cycles in general in the whole economy, in which conditions are favorable, and there are other moments in which conditions are not that favorable. So it always depends on the appetite of the investor, and it depends on the ability that this investor has to navigate into other components, like, for example, FX risk. Right? regarding the hydro component and the influence that it has in the price, 10 years ago, hydro was 80%. Today, hydro, as you said, is slightly over 50% and will continue to reduce to something around 30%. So, eruption of renewables like solar, which is non-existent 10 years ago, and today accounts for, as I said, 30 gigawatts, which is like it's close to 20%. Wind, which is also predominant renewable, make the equation of pricing increasingly complex because of the eruption of intermittent energy. So considering the good source of hydro that Brazil has is a perfect backup for use on the and try to encompass the intermittence of the source. So pricing today are low. The sensibility of the traditionally the Brazilian electricity market to rain, as you perfectly said, is enormous. Probably is not that justified today as it was some years ago. But at the end of the day, we need to understand that if there is a Niña, by which the rain stops, mean also that the production of solar will increase. And at a pace of almost 1 gigawatt per month, that has been the growth path of the last 6 months or 7 months. This composition of price will suffer in the near term, and the ability of the investors is to try to understand how it will work and how to mitigate those risks. So, on top of that, because of the market, because of the size, because of the resource, the opportunity in Brazil is immense. So, need to be careful, need to understand very well the conditions and understand this and the fundamentals of this market and make your place. It's not an easy journey, but it has a reward.
Yeah, interesting. And I like the way you framed it at the start. It's not a short-term prospect. No. And certainly, a number of our listeners, just sort of the European context, Iberdrola, Neoenergia, EDP, obviously, Engie, who are in Florianopolis there, they've all been in Brazil, and I would argue very successfully over a couple of decades. But these organizations are, they're embedded in Brazil and they're committed to Brazil. And I sort of a contrast I remember Johannes Thijssen was at one of Aurora's events, maybe half a decade ago. He was the CEO of E.ON. And sort of the E.ON had been the top of the German stock exchange, the DAX, and had fallen out of it the story is well known. But I think one of the things he pointed most to was foreign exchange risk and Brazil as one of the things he missed, and possibly one of the things he might have managed differently in hindsight. So I love the answer, and it seems to be backed up by history.
I mean, with my conditions of being a Brazilian of heart and Spanish of nationality here, almost 11 years, I think we have gone through a journey in which we understand the difficulties. We can anticipate some of them, not all of them, on a way by which people that is not here, hasn't had that experience, will understand that the world is going to end in 5 minutes. No? And it's not like that. It's new opportunities happen, new challenges appear almost every week. And the fact of as I said, the size of the market really is a differential. Of course, if you don't consider FX risk, obviously, as any other emerging market with a different currency than the dollar or euro, you have a challenge there. There is also a point that I would like to point out to our audience, which is the extremely solid institutions that Brazil has. Doesn't look like that, but it's not true. Brazil is a very serious country in terms of legislation, in terms of application of rules, no retroactivity in our sector at all, never happened, zero. And this gives us a framework in which you can work and you can predict. So the opportunity that we have when we understand that, I mean, we have gone through several administrations, light, right individuals like Bolsonaro, which speak everything that came from his heart and probably not that much from his mind, throughout another populist of left, and the solidity of institutions was put in several administrations trying to jeopardize, and they were so strong that could not resist the attacks of the executive over time. So this is something that really need to be considered.
Yeah, it's a good point. And we've, Aurora's team has been looking at the Brazilian market in detail over the last year. And obviously, there's been a new administration over that period. And yeah, I asked the team, what does this mean? And in general, I think the answer has been basically business as usual to an extent in terms of the institutions of the power markets. Of course, there'll be some more spending on different projects and in different areas, but in terms of the rules of the game, they seem pretty consistent. There is the prospect of sort of simplification of tax, I think, that people are telling me about, which sounds very good, but I'll believe it when I see it. But that's interesting. Do you think you talked about Spanish by nationality? Do you think the southern, and I talked about Iberdrola, EDP, NL as well. Do you think it's easy? Do you think the business context out of Southern Europe translates more easily into Brazil than Northern Europe? Do you have a view on that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Because other American countries, speaking countries, could have more similarity. I think also the flow of people from Spain and from other countries going to Mexico, to Chile, etc., is much higher than in Brazil. Brazil seems similar, but it's a total different animal, totally different. So it is I would say the willingness of understanding the peculiarities that is what make it change. So you are here, you start your business, you come from a different country, culture, and I think you have a very good sense of how this country is. Okay, so independent of being German, being British, being Norwegian, think also on companies like Hydro, which have here since I don't know when, but making very good business, Statkraft. There's a lot of them, and independent of the and I can tell you, because I talk to them every week, that they have an extraordinary perception of this market, much more than many other countries.
Interesting, very interesting. Okay, so one of the so we talked about hydro there and digressed a little bit. One of the other big topics on my mind around Brazil is network build, and like everyone else who's seeing the boom in renewables that you described, Luis, network becomes an issue. Renewables start to get constrained. In Brazil, there's a lot of construction in the northeast around renewables where the yields are best and the land is cheapest. But people are starting to think about the south now for renewables because demand is there in a Brazilian context. Networks are stronger. And ANEEL, the regulatory agency, has held a transmission auction in June and has announced an even bigger one for December this year. So my first question about networks is the pace, ANEEL seems ambitious. Is the pace of investment through these auctions, do you think, enough to enable Brazil to deploy the amount of renewables that it wants to?
So, curtailment, trade-off that you mentioned, this year does not depend on the transmission line. It is depends on lack of consumption on weekends. So with the opening of several enormous lines that are connecting the northeast with the south and the southeast during early this year, curtailment due to transmission is not an issue anymore. It is an issue when you want to, today, it is an issue when you want to interconnect a new project, okay? And the government is working actively on that. As you said, there's mega auctions taking place this year with the companies that are winning these auctions. Their interest is to end the works as soon as possible because they can anticipate the operation if they open first. So I don't think in a midterm this is going to be an enormous issue. For me, the issue is how we compensate the lack of consumption on weekends, especially from 8 in the morning until, well, it's in the case of solar, but from early in the morning until 2, 3 o'clock. We are seeing a phenomenon that did not exist before. Why is this? Because we have a lot of GD that is supplying that energy that before was supplied by the distributors. A lot of people moving to a GD installation. So
yeah, the duck curve, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And why it happens on weekends? Because they are at home on weekends until the shopping enters and the restaurants open, etc. This domestic demand in high consumption markets like the South, is having an issue. Also now in August, we are at the tail of the wind season, and we expect curtailment until the end of the month, in which apparently the wind season ends. So the challenge here is how do we restore the generation that we lost on the weekends? And then there's opening another new set of opportunities. It could be batteries, something that I think that the industry is working right now.
Yeah. Well, and to some extent, this shift towards the free market, I suppose, is a big, to some extent, the answer to that question, which is, well, let's price power on a granular basis, and maybe batteries turn up, maybe people stop, maybe solar is bifacial, or there's tracking solar that changes the profile of generation that can address that, and we will get to the free market in a second. But before I do, just one more thing on the network side. Is it hard in Brazil? I talk about NIMBYs in English-speaking countries, not in my backyard. People who develop, who are opposed to development that's close to demand, basically, or human populations. Do you see that sort of movement as a problem for building, onshore wind, for building transmission in Brazil, or is that the biggest challenge, or are there bigger challenges out there in developing network and onshore infrastructure?
Okay, so this is a super interesting question, because it's something that is starting now. Okay, so let's go back to Brazil and the characteristics of this country. So, as all of you know, it's a vast continent, it's gigantic. Okay, and if we set up, let's start first with a PV plant close to a population, in which normally people that is in not very much favorized. In some cases, they don't even have electricity, and whoever builds a plant close to them, obviously there's going to be opposition. They don't benefit from that. Okay, there is a chance to build PV plants very far away from people, from anybody, in which there is no this interaction with people, in which people can feel that they have that A, don't participate, B, they have a PV plant that is not bringing anything to them. Case of wind, it's a little the same. You have an enormous country in which there's a lot of resources. There's a place built up a wind farm close to a community, and for sure you're going to have issues. It's not only depending on granting the license. It's on how the people benefit from that. And if you set in my backyard a wind tower, and the only thing that I see is sound, and is shades, and is I lost my perspective and my panoramic view. Obviously, I'm going to be against that. I think the issue is very different to Europe, in which, unfortunately, the lack of space makes that confidence has to be yes or yes. Here it's not like that. Here is you have to set up your projects in an intelligent way, by which A, the people benefit, and B, they don't interfere with the community. So entities that develop projects like us will really consider that, and it is an given by which today we do not face any issues. We don't project that we'll suffer any issues, among other things, because of our concern about the communities.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what then? That's really interesting. It does, contrasts with Europe definitely, and the northeast of the US. And I think you're right. In certain states, Texas is a really good example where you've got reasonably big spaces, and it does become easier to develop big infrastructure. My home country, Australia, it's a little bit in the middle. There seem to be big spaces, but the grid is a bit weak, and it is still quite hard to develop in general. If you what is the heart? So if you were to name one thing, then your job is to get shovels in the ground, building power stations. What's the most difficult aspect of building renewables in Brazil?
I think the most difficult aspect is to understand the process and get track. Okay, so I'm not expert in other countries, but here you can have fully licensed project in 12 to 15 months. Okay. Knowing the process, understand the risk, doing the appropriate assessments. Compared to other countries, I don't know if it is a lot or not, but licensing time here in solar takes the same time than building. Okay, so it's 1 year for licensing, 1 year for building, more or less. It used to be much worse. When we started here, some of the permit issuers didn't understand solar, so they tend to go to hydro risk, and took a little time to make them understand. It is not like that, and especially in states that are very pro-business, like Minas Gerais, this process normally takes less than that. It could be almost with all the correct measurements, etc., can take a little as 8 months.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I think there will be a lot of envious renewable developers listening to this podcast. It's not uncommon. It's certainly in Europe or the US to be told it's a sort of 5 to 10 year queue for some of these projects at times.
I'm not considering this the time of that you need to measure the results. Okay, there is 3 years in solar, in wind, 1 year in solar. But also that's something that you need to consider when you're going to locate your project. So I don't think it's something ridiculous. I think it's something that you need to, as an investor, to make sure that you have the right resource.
Yeah. Okay, great. So can we shift? I said we'd get to this sort of shift to the free market, and I think for people involved in the Brazilian power market, one of the bigger regulatory changes going on is this shift, which basically enables consumers are starting to be allowed, first with the high voltage transmission, but very quickly throughout the system. Consumers are being allowed to basically contract power directly with generation assets or pay something that's similar to a kind of granular spot price, hourly or something like that spot price. In your mind, how does this change to the free market change the nature of renewables investment? And the sorts of things I'm thinking about, Luis, are the role of PPAs. Does this make them easier? Does it change the risk for investors? Does capital structure change? Does it mean there's more or less debt in projects? Does it mean a movement away from sort of current models kind of develop and own, I think, in Brazil, to one where people are developing and selling to investment funds or something like that? Where do you see the biggest changes from this shift to the free market?
Okay, so this is opening an enormous opportunity. So at the end of the day, there's like 80 million consumers in Brazil, which is an enormous amount of people and entities. So I would reframe the answer on the market. So let's make three groups. One, which will be the electro-intensive consumers, which are like 50 in Brazil. Okay, some of them are contracted, some of them will be contracted in the next year. So this is a limited market with the enormous possibilities. So this will not change, will continue as it is today, big projects, big financing, big PPAs. There is another sector, which is, I would say, around 10,000 customers, which are intermediate customers, in which this shouldn't change that much. Today, they are buying from comercializadoras, which is trading companies, most of them, and they don't care about the origin of their energy. So normally they're receiving hydro, they're receiving a combination of hydro and renewables. It really depends. Their only concern is about the curve and that they receive the energy that we want. So in this particular segment, I think there's a big opportunity for companies that deliver and produce renewable energy, because there is going to be a concern of the origin of the energy. And it's a market that is kind of in a gray area, because GD does not reach them in a big way, and big companies, they're small today. So there is, yes, an opportunity there. Needs a different conception of financing. This is also a trend from project-oriented companies like we are to customer-oriented companies. So maybe in the near future, our projects will have not one PPA, but can have 100 PPAs. Okay, and it's something that's going to happen. Something that we need to be ready, and also to combine with other sources of energy, so we are able to deliver a flat curve. There is the people in personal consumers, like we can be, that will be liberalized in the next 3 years. That's obviously a different segment that has to be addressed on a different way, and there will be a link between them and generators through the trading companies. So I could see a movement, an enormous movement there, being addressed by trading companies trying to pay their consumption. We're talking about millions of consumers there. So how we generators approach that market mainly will be like, as many companies are doing, created their own trade companies and reaching that segment of the market. So it is a very challenging opportunity. I think the key word is that, obviously, apart from financing and organizing construction in a way that can be sequential, it is the willingness of the final customer to receive green energy. Okay? And our ability to talk to the final customer and say, guys, you want a green energy, sustainable energy, we are here, and we have a proposal that is as good as the one you're receiving today, or even better. Partially, this market has been addressed by GD. As we said before, it's like 20 gigawatts of GD, and there is I would say a portion of those customers that are domestic electro-intensive. That in Brazil, there is a lot of people that consume a lot of domestic electricity. Many of them had entered into an agreement with somebody that provides energy from GD, or they have put an installation in the roof. Today, somebody that has, I don't know, like 10, 15, 20 kilowatts in the roof with a certain resource, not a lot of resource, can easily depreciate their installation in 5 years. Okay, so it is a good, in my opinion, a good investment. And at the end of the day, is a massive portion of this new market that's going to be deregulated. They have been deregulated today.
Yeah, interesting. And it does. As you were speaking, I was sort of also reflecting on a debate that's been in the kind of liberalized markets globally for 20 years of sort of what are the benefits of vertical integration. Are the traders, the retailers, should they be the ones that own the generation, or can you separate these things? It's a much longer conversation, but it sounds like a relevant topic as well. Good. The final topic I want to touch on here before I move to the final segment of the show, which I call overrated, underrated, is around the green transition plan. So it was announced a couple of days ago. I'm sure you've been following it. 1.7 trillion reals is the high level number, which is about $350 billion US. A lot of money for oil and gas, but a decent amount for electricity with a focus on renewables. And obviously a lot of detail that's not there. We don't know what the instruments are and things like that. Do you see this as a game changer, Luis? Where do you see the biggest impacts of this policy as you currently understand it?
Okay, so I think it's a very good announcement. Obviously, it wants to touch the heart of the Brazilian, which means that the government is taking about them and is announcing policies that will increase the number of jobs and will pump enormous amount of public investment in these initiatives. Okay? So from our point of view, it's always a good opportunity. Whatever is made to increase the consumption of energy, and we believe these initiatives will be, is a good news for the market. So huge investment on oil and gas. The presence of gas today in Brazil, because it's very expensive, is not as relevant as it is in another market. But again, at the end of the day, what's the final consumer want? What's renewable energy? What industrial consumers want and need to comply with their sustainability reports? And here we have to give an answer to this concerned consumer. So in a country like Brazil, there's room for everybody. It's only a matter of how we can stress the consumption of electricity, which today is still very low compared to other countries. So there's enormous room for growth, enormous.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Well, we will, we will see the details as they come out. But yeah, it certainly seems like a sign of intent. So what I'd like to do to finish the show is a segment I call overrated, underrated, and I'm going to present you with a set of concepts around the energy transition in Brazil, and I'd like your views on whether you think they're overrated by your average energy professional or underrated by your average energy professional. Okay. So first of all, the first one relates to that last question: the impact of the green transition plan on renewable investment in Brazil. Do you think it's overrated? People are too excited about it, or do you think it's underrated?
I think it's underrated. I mean, if you take a small group of I wouldn't say decision makers, but it's people of reference in Brazil. Obviously, they are disseminating a very coherent message. If you go one step down, nobody really understand what that is.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. And what about the role of gas as a transition fuel to a low carbon power sector in Brazil? Do you think the role of gas is overrated or underrated?
Role of gas is underrated. I think the country needs to have a bigger presence of gas. Okay, the amount of investment that is required is enormous, and will it happen or not? I'm not in conditions to say that. What I perceive it is, yes, there is a need. It will be a good balance on the energy sources, but a lot of things need to happen. So we'll see.
Okay, great. Third concept: the level of reform required in the Brazilian power market to get close to net zero emissions. Do you think that's overrated or underrated?
I think it's underrated. I think it's there is a lot of risks and a lot of challenges that are not on the table. Okay? And as there's a lot of willingness of doing things and a lot of doing willingness, especially to end with the consumption of oil in Amazonia, okay, which is one of the biggest concerns of Lula's government. How to tackle that? And we have been in very close and several conversations with the ministry. It's difficult because there's 11 million people that lives in an enormous state with very difficulties on reaching energy other than fuel. And also, to be honest, a lot of interest in continue with this situation. As if today there is a lot of interest in delivering this oil in very remote locations, because there's an industry behind that, and transport, distribution, and switching that to other source of energy is going to take some time in a territory which is very difficult by itself.
Okay, excellent. And then
Amazonas is not the mainstream.
Yeah. Okay, but yes, this is not going to be a smooth journey, and and we need some very clever people thinking about some of these issues. That sounds like. The final one, and it goes all the way back to one of the topics we touched on at the start, Luis, which is policy risk perceptions of foreign investors into Brazil. Do you think they're overrated or underrated?
I think they're underrated. I mean, as I said, we really need to very well understand the risk, because sometimes are perceived as enormous risk and they're not. But it requires time and money to really have a clear picture of the opportunities that Brazil has. Obviously, I'm an enormous defendant of Brazil, of its institutions, of the opportunities, trying to work hard as Atlas and Isola, myself and my family, to make a better place of this country. but it has very solid foundations that has to be considered. And I really try to open this mind to foreign investors and perceive the reality of Brazil as it is. It's easy now. It's very difficult. Is it a serious country? Yes, it is. Has a FX risk, enormous. But as manage that risk will give you a high reward.
Yeah. And it is, for what it's worth, from my side. And as you know, I've been spending quite a lot of time, establishing a business in Brazil recently. The other thing I would say is that has blown me away, and maybe this is a Sao Paulo thing rather than all of Brazil, but it just seems like a total magnet for very clever, talented people. Sao Paulo, we're sort of interviewing people, Brazilians for jobs and things like that, and it just seems like there's this hugely skilled, hugely talented, hardworking population there, which is makes life easier and makes working more enjoyable when your colleagues are clever.
There's people that have access to good universities. Good universities here are excellent. Also, as opposed to other countries like Spain, during their during university, they need to work. They have to have serious professional experience. So when they reach the market, it's people that has 2-3 years of experience, people that's very well trained. And because of the difficulty of this country, people have to be smart.
Yeah, it's going to be a problem solver.
Exactly. It's not like, it is fun when we send some of our executives abroad. They say, but the import process here in whatever and the taxes. And then they say, come, stop. Brazil is the one that have very difficult legislation. So they have to live with that, and they understand that. And I think it's a mindset that is very, very beneficial for other countries, on top of, as I said, the people that have access to good education is extremely well trained.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Yeah. I remember I got advice from an American renewables developer, I think, as we were entering Brazil. And he said, the most important thing you have to remember about investment in Brazil, renewables development, is there is always another tax. Was his advice. So anyway.
Yeah, as I said, not only to understand the taxes, but also to understand the exemptions.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay, wonderful, Luis. So that's a natural note to finish on, I think. And may I say, this is our first podcast we've had focused on the Brazilian market, and I can't think of anyone better to have had on than someone who has pioneered this sector really from the very start, certainly in the solar context, to share his expertise. So, Luis Pita, thank you so much for taking the time to speak.
Thank you very much, John, and very happy to contribute to open the eyes to other people regarding this fantastic country.
That was John Feddersen, Aurora's founder and chief executive, talking to Luis Pita, general manager of Atlas Renewable Energy. Do keep an eye on our podcast feed for more in-depth conversations with senior members of the energy industry. The best way to do this is to subscribe on whatever platform you use. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.